Welcome to the January webinar. It was meant to be at the end of January, but it rolled into the first day of February. But nonetheless, I'm super excited about this one. I've been, I guess, kind of preparing for this one for the last 2 months in this time that I haven't took some time away, but I've been watching a lot of football in that time, and in that time I found a lot of inspiration in a lot of dynamic teams that we've seen this year in Girona and Leverkusen and obviously some Manchester City, um, and through all that watching, I tried to distill a main idea into this webinar, which is 2v2s. So the idea of breaking down the game to help individual player development into 2v2 situations, and today we're going to go through the theory behind it, or the logic, the logical steps that we can deduce in order to get to how we can simplify these situations for players, and then to create maybe some language around these situations to try to help players and direct their attention towards what might be the most effective way to view these situations. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to start with, 1 second here. We're going to start with indecision. So indecision is something that I've always kind of intuitively known about the game, and I've heard many coaches use different words for it. For me, the term indecision kind of defines it best. Like I say here, indecision is that moment where the defender may not know what to do, and we try to exploit those conditional factors to hopefully give us some space and time. And that sense of doubt in the defender, where do I track my runner into the midfield? Do I cover the space in behind? There's many types of indecisions, and if you really think about when you hear about 2 versus 1s, trying to create 2 versus 1s in certain areas of the field, that's a form of indecision, right? Like double movements at individual level. When you see videos of like Kylian Mbappe, when he goes to the ball and then goes away, those are slight, very, very quick moments of indecision for the defender, where it appears that he's, going towards the ball, and then at the last second he goes away from the ball. So we're going to really double down on this idea of indecision, and how can we create indecision in small-sided situations like 2v2. We can create, as a general topic, we can create indecision as within our tactics, so as groups, and you can think about it in terms of, if you have a tactic, a team principle, something along the lines of dribbling into the midfield, the center back dribbles into the midfield to create some sort of overload. That's a tactic. Yes, at the execution level, it's individual, but at a group level, that's a tactic being used, maybe formulated or created by the coach, or proposed by the coach, in order to create a form of indecision. We can do what we're going to focus on today is the game understanding at an individual level to create indecision, and often this is done kind of unconsciously and in an automatic way, without conscious thinking of it. Yes, there's a form of like, if I go here, then I can then drag a defender out, and then I'll use that space in behind. But when it's happening in the game, in match situations, often it's through the exposure, consistent exposure over time to those situations, which is what we're going to discuss later on when we get to the training section. And as I say there, the way that we can develop that game understanding, or that game insight, is through experience over time, and they learn that over time. second. Okay, so how are we going to do that? So the primary way, or what we're going to focus on a lot in the next 40 minutes is the idea of attention. And for those of you that are familiar with some, maybe some of the workshops that I've run before, or maybe even a past webinar, I talk a lot about attention, because I do think that that's the primary role of a coach, is to be able to direct attention towards the things that are most important, especially for young players. They don't know, in terms of there are amateurs in the sport, right? Like they haven't developed the expert eye of within the game that allows them to make decisions and be creative, and all of the things that come after being able to focus their attention towards the really important things in the game. So it's the same thing here. We want to develop the idea of attention, but we're going to use it a little bit differently today, and we're going to try to have the players understand where is the opponent's attention, where is this defender's attention, what are they paying attention to, right? And I think, as you see on the slide there, when players begin to empathetically understand where the opponent's attention is, then they know where they can then exploit, right? So like, I remember I worked with this player. She was a professional player. She played high level Division I soccer in the United States, and then went on to play professionally. She played as an attacking role, and she used to say that she would often watch her defender's gaze, so she would pay attention to where her mark was looking, and she knew that if her mark would look over her shoulder once and then twice, the second time that her mark would look over her shoulder, she would then run, because she knew often her mark, or the players that she played against, didn't look 3 times. So after the second time, she knew that she could make a run in behind and into a blindside position and exploit space much easier. So that this is that same idea, understanding the how you can pay attention to your opponent's attention to be able to know how you can exploit their attention. And this, it talks about indecision. To create indecision, the opponent needs to have 2 separate options, right? Like they need to think that there are 2 options that they have to choose between. And those 2 options are a form of attention, right? We try to create that attention for them to pay attention to. And this is the initial part of how do we create that indecision in these small situations. Okay, so as a starting point, as I said, understanding that each player has a momentary direct opponent. So in Spain, I did my UEFA licensing in Spain, and I spent a long time in Spain, about 7 years, working at different levels. And one of the things that struck me the most when I first arrived was that they would use this term pairs. So in Spanish, pares, right? And they would talk about that it didn't really matter the level, and even at the youth level, they would direct the young players' attention to that each of them had a pair. They had some sort of direct opponent that was that was tasked with defending them. So this kind of language creates a lens for them to view the game, and I think it's a valuable word or language because it allows players to understand that within a certain moment of the game, they have an opposition counterpart, which is their pair. And of course, those pairs change, right? At any given moment, they might have some sort of rotation, some sort of interchange. But in that new moment, they should be able to, again, identify and recognize who their direct opponent is or who their pair is. And this is the beginning of the dynamics of a 2 versus 2, right? Like that 2v2 situation all over the field. If we if players can begin to understand that they have their pair, and then they understand, okay, my nearest teammate or the ball carrier who is nearest to me also has a direct opponent, has a pair. How can we break the defensive pair up in order to create a 2 versus 1 situation? Right. So in numerical equality situations, 2 versus 2, how can we break that defensive pair into one, and how can we exploit that? And that's what we're going to be looking at today. So primarily, I looked at two types of situations. As you can see, the majority of the situations that we're going to look at today are around step 3. So for those of you that are joining us without having any experience in the it's just a sport language or environment, step 3, as I describe in the coaching positional play online course, is getting behind the back line. So how can we exploit the space behind the back line? And then after, we're going to look at some examples in step 3, and then we'll look at some examples in step 1 and 2. So there's an obvious difference between those two moments of the game, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the first one, and we'll see, actually, the primary focus of this might be Girona, because this is what kind of sparked my interest around it. Because they actually do this really, really well, and they do this in a very dynamic way, in a very creative way, right? And it seems to me, as an onlooker of the game, that there's an encouragement of individuality, and there's an encouragement of go try things, right? But there is a sense of we're trying to create these 2 versus 2 to then create 2 versus 1 situation. So let me stop sharing. I wonder. Okay, you're still seeing that. I'm going to now share this tab here. Okay. So the first, we'll see a couple, and I'll let them just play without my commentary. Okay, so you can see initially, and hopefully it wasn't too choppy and you were able to get a sense of it. But initially, that as that ball goes out wide, you can see that there's a very clear 2 versus 2, and from there, there's a run in behind, and I'm going to show you a few more because there's a constant pattern to this. So again, in this case, we have that 2 versus 2, which then eventually is with the purpose of exploiting that space behind. In this case, we have a 2 versus 2, which then, because of how things play out, turns into a 3 versus 3. But you can see there's a intention to continue to try to exploit that space within that small-sided 2 versus 2, 3 versus 3 situation. So it's here. We have a 3 versus 3 here, and instead of going around, they continue to try to exploit those runs in behind. And it's constant. In this case, it's unsuccessful. However, there's what's most important to me as I watch that is the intention. In this case, we have an area. In this one here, this is a 2 versus 2, again in a wide area. But now in this case, the player is able to exploit their 1 versus 1 ability, because most likely there's an indecision about Let me backtrack it a bit. You can see that there's a player here who makes a run and around, and in that moment, perhaps, I can't tell you what's going through that player's head through the direct opponent of the ball carrier, but perhaps there's some. Is he going to continue to play it to the teammate who's running in behind? And in that, I think there's exploiting that quick sense of indecision. Last one, and then I'm going to open it up a little bit to reflections. In this case, I want you to pay attention to the player who receives the ball, Savio. He receives it, and unfortunately, they zoom in on him, so you can't see the 2 versus 2. But what you can focus on here is how he opens his hips to open opportunities to play in the 2 versus 2. And we'll see that later on with a different vision for his direct opponent to think, hey, he might play it in behind, right? Which then allows him to escape the other way. Okay, so before I continue, as we watched those, did anybody have any reflections, any thoughts as you were watching? There's obviously a pattern to those types of situations and trying to get in behind in those wide areas. Did anybody have any reflections? Or any just thoughts that you can relate to your own team, to your own players, to your own training environments, anything like that?
David, I can chime here. Just
Sure.
it got me to thinking about, when we are setting up pairings in practice, sometimes we're more intentional on our offensive players being with our defensive players, but it seems like when some of these, 2v2s come across, there might be a combination of some of our offense and defensive players. So it just starts getting me thinking, okay, if I'm having say an outside back pushing up higher to create this 2v2 situation, do I need to be more intentional with creating, in practice, good pairings that they get time on the ball together. So it's not just necessarily focusing on, the attacking or the defending players getting, whether it's in a rondo or something that they're working on, but being mindful of, that there's a good mix so that when maybe we are pressing higher, there's that opportunity.
That's a great reflection, Derek, and I thank you for sharing that. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of those situations where, especially in wide areas, it can be a wide player, maybe 7, 11, even. It doesn't really matter what, but like it's an attacking wide player, and it combines with maybe an outside back making a run behind or making an underlap, and those kinds of combinations. Yeah, I think it's important to maybe less so like really young, right? Because at that point you want to combine as many players as you can together without pigeonholing players who are playing together. But it's definitely as they get older, now we're talking 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. At that point, there's definitely tendencies towards these players tend to play together and they tend to play well together. Let's exploit their ability to their understanding of each other. So yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that, Derek.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to continue here. So now we're going to see the king of players running of getting into wide areas to create 2 versus 1. Kevin De Bruyne. So you can see that he uses, different kinds of movements going around the ball carrier to create those 2 versus 1s. He a lot of blindside runs behind the direct opponent, so the pair, trying to break that pair up. Here we have another overlapping run, and that creating that moment of indecision of, where do I defend? Do I defend the ball carrier who might beat me on the inside? Do I defend that I can see that player is making a run? Do I defend that overlap? That moment of indecision is the one that we're, oh, sorry, were you guys able to see that? No. No, okay. I was on the wrong tab. I apologize. There we go. So now all the words that I just said, now apply it to these images. As you can see, we have some overlapping runs. We have runs in behind the blindside positioning of the direct opponent of the ball carrier. All those types of movements, all those moving from position to position, are all creating that tiny sense of doubt in the opposition, in the direct opponent, and that indecision that I discussed. And here, same thing. We have Bernardo Silva making a run behind, creating a difficult situation for that player, right? He's trying to defend two ideas at once, two potential intentions at once, which is very difficult to do. And we'll go back to, so now in this case, I want to show you how sometimes it's not even about getting past the back line, rather it's creating enough, like I talked about, creating enough space and time, because there's indecision, to have, in this case, it's a cross. It's a cross that can't be blocked, and it's an easy cross for the player on the ball, which ultimately leads to a goal. So you can see here, as the ball goes wide, both the Barcelona players defend the deep option, which gives Williams plenty of space, plenty of time to be able to put a good cross in. So that's that same idea, and I'll show you that slight moment of, you can pause it because it's really cool. That moment of indecision, this, I think Kounde, he feels, he senses that there's a run in behind, and they both go to defend that run. Do I defend the run? Do I defend the player? Ultimately, neither defend the player, which allows a pretty simple cross in. Okay, so another one here. In this case, we have Leeds. Oh no, we have Brighton, I apologize. We have, you can actually, and what I love about this most is you can see that indecision. He knows he's defending the player, but he also senses and sees and perceives that there's a run in around. And we can create that quick moment of indecision. I'm gonna have to rename that. And then lastly, again, we have Brighton. In this case, it's a transition within our talk here, our discussion, to start seeing how we can use this in the build-up as well. So it doesn't end goal. So we have a moment where Ppponent, he's their left back, he uses the blind side positioning, so he breaks his pair. Where is my direct opponent's attention going? And I'm going to use that to be able to exploit a space to progress. Goal where the player on the ball, because of a run, in this case it's going to be Ppponent, he's going to be running in behind. Because of that run, Mitoma is able to go inward, right, to put the ball on his right foot, contested or at least semi-contested. Okay, so let me move on to in the build-up. What does that look like in the build-up? And in the build-up, as you'll see, in this case, we're going to be watching Palacio. He sees his direct, well, the direct opponent, his direct opponent, at a certain moment chooses to go towards the ball. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to position myself blindside to be able to progress and make it at 2 versus 1 at some point. So now we'll see this in Manchester City's build-up. In this favorite part of this clip, Kyle Walker, he notices that his direct opponent is obviously going towards I can't see who that is. Maybe Ruben Diaz, towards the center back, and he notices this. He wants the ball. He positions himself blindside. You can see that movement here. The direct opponent's attention is towards the ball. He wants the ball in there. He doesn't get it. And you can see that there's some. The last one we'll see again is from Girona. And in this case, we have his name, I think, is Pablo Torres, I believe his name is. He's actually a young player from Barcelona. He's on loan to Girona this season, but he's very good. You can see that he recognizes that perhaps this may have been his direct opponent, or he's going to break the direct opponent. He's going to break the pair. The pair being this player is his. I hate it when this happens, but you can see that again. This player is going to try to break the pair here to create a 2 versus. So you can see that this. I think it's this kind of tool is most exciting for step 3, because I think this is probably on at least speaking from experience. This is getting into the back line is something that is difficult for players to understand, and it's difficult for players to experience and to learn. So trying to create situations where we can help them with this is vitally important. So now that we've seen those situations, we have them, hopefully some of those in our mind, we can start to look at how we can train it. Perfect. Okay. So again, I think the key aspect is blindside positioning. So what is blindside positioning? Obviously, we're all familiar with the term, but in my experience, when we have clear language to try to define it, we can then formulate or communicate it in a maybe more clear way to our players in case they don't understand. Well, what do you mean by blindside, right? Like off ball, we want to make the direct opponent of the ball carrier choose either me or the ball carrier, right? So like as that player is going towards as the direct opponent, their attention is towards the ball, I want to force them to either follow me, I'm behind them, follow me, right? Or go towards the ball, in which case I become the free player. And that's how we can hopefully create 2 versus 1 from 2 versus 2 situations. The constraints, in this case the offside law, make it difficult, make it more difficult for in step 3. In step 1, in the build-up, players can position themselves behind the pressing player, which makes it much easier to be able to do that. In step 3, getting in behind the back line, because of offside, you can't just position yourself offside, but therefore you have to time. You have to time your run in accordance, in relation to the player passing the ball, in relation to where the defender is, which makes it extremely difficult, which is why it's very difficult for young players, and for those of you that work with especially young players, for them to understand the concept of timing runs in behind is extremely difficult, right? But if we can put them in situations where they're constantly experiencing this type of situation, and they sense they start to gather consistent experience around it, they can learn. This isn't something that's you say, well, they'll just learn eventually. No, we can help them learn quicker. Okay, so now let's get into training so we can look at some training exercises. The first thing, and for those of you that have done the coaching positional play online course, one of the tools that I discuss there is experience before reflection. So we want to create the experience first, which is the training experience. We want the activity that's recreating that situation that they're going to experience in the game to help them understand and to execute better, and to be able to relive that experience in training. And the tools that we'll use to recreate those situations is directionality. I think this is vitally important, to be able to know that there's a direction towards our intended goal in this 2 versus 2 situation. Hopefully in they can create 2 versus 1, but we need directionality. So the way that we do that is, where do we position the objective, whether that's a small goal, if it's an end zone, it's a big goal, whatever it is, we need to consider how are we positioning the objective in order to create that intention or directionality for the players. The number of players, in this case, we're going to be using 2 versus 2. We can use 3 versus 3, as we saw in that one of those examples. And lastly, starting positions. And I'll show you what I mean by this later on, but this kind of creates the dynamics or the situation that maybe will create something different rather than something they're accustomed to, something that's more match-like. And then for the reflective part, so how we engage with them, how we use our language to direct their attention. The first thing is, we want to start for them to recognize their direct opponent, their pair. Like in this 2 versus 2, who's marking you, who's marking your teammate? How can we mess with that? How can we manipulate that? But the first part is that they have to recognize it, right? They have to recognize the relationship between themselves and their opponent. And then secondly, we can use language. In this case, we'll use individual principles, on the ball principles. This is just one that you could use, one that I've used in the past. On the ball, we either want to progress or commit the direct opponent to create a moment of indecision in collaboration with a teammate. The words that you might use, the words that I use consistently, right? I don't say that whole phrase to players, but I might use progress or commit. So I simplify the decision for them. Have them. You either want to keep going with the ball if you can. If you feel comfortable to take them on 1 versus 1, great. Just keep progressing, or commit a direct opponent to be able to create space for your teammate to continue to progress the ball. And then off the ball, can you provide a passing option behind the player who's committed to the ball, right? So if your teammate has committed a direct opponent, whether that's yours or their own, how can the supporting player, provide a passing option behind that player that has committed to the ball? And that, I use in brackets there, blindside, right? That maybe that might be the word that triggers that idea. So ultimately, can I make the defender choose the ball or my teammate? And when the defender does choose the ball, I become the free player. It's all about indecision. Make the defender choose. Make them choose something, or force them into a decision. And this last tool, these are kind of tools here. If it's not occurring, if the potential movements or they're not having success with those situations, how can you manufacture it and then have them reflect on it? So how can you make it so that they have success. Maybe it's simplifying it into 2 versus 1. Maybe it's saying, hey, next time, how about you make a run in behind? Or, hey, next time, why don't you hold, play a 1-2 and see what happens? And then have them reflect with, hey, what did you notice when you did that? What does your direct opponent do when you position yourself higher or lower or in the middle? Or right, have them reflect on those experiences that you, yes, maybe you guide them into, but you can like I said, manufacture it so that they can reflect on it. And lastly, the most important, I think, is it has to connect to the objectives of the game, which is to progress and to score. Oftentimes players, especially young players, in the 2 versus 2, they'll support their teammate next to each other without ever looking to get in behind, and ultimately the goal is to progress and to score. Okay, any thoughts there before I catch my breath? Okay, let's continue to the training. All right, so as you see there, very simple activity, and it's important that I emphasize the simplicity of it is what allows for you or anyone watching this to provide the depth, the richness, to give the situation as much realism as you can. And we can make it as specific or we can leave it as broad as we want. So I'm going to stop sharing this and we'll go to the tactical pad and we'll talk about some situations here. All right, let's do this. And this is where we can get a bit more collaborative, right? I've prepared 4 types of situations, 4 types of activities within this 2 versus 2 that we can use and that I've used, but that isn't the extent of it. Like, this isn't, I would like, as I'm saying, most likely, as I'm talking, this will trigger some ideas or things that you've done in the past in these 2 versus 2 situations to help players understand or maybe manage these situations a little bit better. So in this first activity, it's a 2 versus 2. The black team is going towards the the end zone. The team in white is defending the end zone, and if they recover the ball, they go towards the small goal. The ball in this situation starts with this player here, and now we're this situation is focusing on step 3, so getting in behind, which means that offside is vitally important. If we don't play with offside, we're going to miss out on, like I talked about, the timing of things, right? They have to feel the offside, and obviously this will be different if you're playing 7 versus 7 or something, you know, 5, maybe younger, 5 versus 5. If there's no offside, then ignore that part. So in this case, the ball starts here with a deep player, a back player, and the ball is live. As soon as that ball goes into here, all players are live. Okay, this is what I mean by starting positions, right? Having this player start here as opposed to here, for our example, entirely changes the dynamics of, or the behavior that is most likely going to occur from different starting positions, right? So by having this player start here, we're emphasizing that there might be more space towards this right side of the field, and you know, I can explain why in this case I want to do that, or why I want to constrain behavior in that way. But it's just one example. So like I said, in this case, ball goes to here. What occurs then, most likely, and through experience and what I've seen, there's many options that they can do. Players that are familiar with these situations might do an overlap. Yeah, there might be some like underlapping situation. This player the other thing that might occur is as that player makes a run behind, he's going to get marked. And as we saw in the game, this player now has space to run in towards the far side. So that's just one example. Any thoughts before I move on to the next example, or how would improve it for your context, or one thing that somebody has pointed out to me is, well, in those wide area situations, they're asymmetrical, right? So the directionality of it, the space on this far side in a real match, if this were a right-sided player, this might be a central midfielder, 10, an 8, a 9, whatever. This far side of the field is less valuable, right? If the goal, therefore, we might make it so the end zone looks more like this. Maybe you could say there's 2 points if you dribble into this end zone, 1 point if you dribble into this one, therefore changing the directionality of it, right? That completely changes, again, constrains the behavior of these players because they'll add more value to one side or the other. Any thoughts there? Any reflections, pop-up thoughts as you see that situation? How would you change? How would you change the dynamics of the game or the intended behavior? How might you change? Or let me ask you a different question. How would the game change, or how would behavior change if the ball, instead of starting from instead of starting from this player down here, it starts from this player? How might that change the behavior of the game?
I'll give it a go. Hi
Yeah.
everyone.
Hi, Matt.
Sorry, let me just turn on my camera. Just for hi. I would suggest that the basic change in this simple situation would be that you're adding a step before you create the blindside run. Um, you'll probably force a pass back in certain ways, and then you'd essentially restart from your original proposition. But
Good day.
in working with young kids to encourage collective possession, it's very important to get the fullbacks engaged in a support position. So that's essentially what you're having here, right? You would have your right winger going up and having your right fullback behind him or her, and then starting position is there. We're still trying to get in behind. How can we help? And then everything applies again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it adds a layer of complexity, right? Like that's, I think you're right. By having the ball start initially from here, it's simpler, right? Like we're facilitating this first pass, which makes it easy to progress initially. Therefore, you're already one step further than you were in the other way around if the ball goes this way first, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that would add a different layer of maybe different runs, right? Like if that ball initially goes backward, and the defenders are able to get towards the ball carrier, now this player becomes offside, and now it entirely changes the dynamic of how we're going to create a 2 versus 1 within this 2 versus 2. So one of the things that practically you might notice when you do this is the direction that players dribble let's say it's this way around. When the ball starts from this wide player, it goes here. The player naturally might just start dribbling forward, whereas if we take into account what we talked about, how are we going to break these pairs? Who do we want to target to create this 2 versus 1? If we can dribble, if they can dribble towards maybe my teammate's direct opponent initially, maybe that will facilitate an easier ball in behind, because then it forces this player into a moment of indecision, right? So it's the direction of their runs. The other thing that you'll notice is, especially with young players, as they receive the ball here, when the ball starts from deep and goes here, which direction, as we saw in that video of the Girona player opening their hips, a moment to just a quick moment to freeze this opponent, right? If this player receives it and is always facing their teammate backwards, oh, that's no indecision at all. That's boom, easy for the defender, because they know exactly they know where it's going to go. It's going to go back because their hips give it away, right? So if we can help players initially receive and give that communication to the defender, the direct opponent, that there might be a movement in behind, right? They open their hips up like we saw in that video, quick open of the hips. It freezes the opponent just for a second to potentially cover down the line or maybe a dribble, and now maybe creates a different opportunity, opens a different window of time and space. So that's the first thing. Now, the next situation is that might be for it's a very simple situation, but that we can play how we can create the different dynamics from that. Maybe it's for example, player starting out here, the ball is live as soon as this player is played played here. From there, entirely changes the dynamic again, right? Maybe this one defender is a recovering defender, therefore now we have we've already established that 2 versus 1 momentary 2 versus 1 that we have to exploit. If we want to make it more difficult, maybe we want to recreate, there's a center back and an outside back, so we put them along the same line. And how would that change the scenario? Okay, how would we change the scenario if maybe there was a goal, right? Instead of end zones, there's a goal, an asymmetric goal on one corner. How would that change the scenario? All these things, all these ways, it's endless how you can change the dynamics of this 2 versus 2, right? And it depends on that situation that we have in mind. In the case of this one, I had in mind, ball goes from a 10 out to maybe a 7, a right winger, and how can we target, break this pair, the pair, that pair? How can we break that pair through underlapping runs, overlapping runs, and essentially make this player unimportant in the situation? And we'll finish with, okay, that's for step 3. That's for exploiting space behind. We're playing with offside. What about when we're trying to create a situation within step 1 or step 2 in the build-up, right? How would we change there? Well, first thing, no, we don't play offside. Second thing, maybe, depending on your game model or how you value different spaces on the field, but we might not have 2 two different end zones, and it might just be the one end zone, because ultimately if we can progress in a build up forward, it's might be the same whether we do it in a wide area or we do it centrally. Therefore, we might value it the same. And especially when we're building up, you're often going to be faced with players that are numerically even, right? Like we have to create this extra player. So the next situation, and let me see if I can get rid of that. Yeah, perfect. In this situation, we'll start again. Ball now starts with the defender, goes into the maybe a center back, and this would be a right back, right? And from here, one player will press, one player will cover. How can we create similar situations? If you recall the Kyle Walker wanting the ball, right? This player goes and presses, makes a run blindside because it's a direct opponent. How can we create these situations, right? In a build-up, we might have numerical advantages because teams won't press with as many. Therefore, maybe we use a neutral player just to facilitate that process, or maybe we don't, just to have players develop the ability to feel comfortable on the ball in numerical equality and still create 2 versus 1 situation. So how might this player have to dribble? In which direction would they want to dribble in order to isolate and break one of those pairs, right? Different situation, and we might change that from left to right. Different situation might be, again, ball starts out here with the defenders. Ball goes into a center back, maybe it's a center mid, but a deeper player. And from here, it's live. And starting position, instead of being out here now, is out here. How does this change the situation? In this case, from my experience, if this manipulates or this constrains the behavior of the defenders, because now they have to consider if they both press, then it's a simple split. If they stagger, now this player has to react in order to provide a passing option and break one of these pairs. This player might have to choose in which direction to dribble. All of these considerations that I'm saying out loud, these are the things that are going to be happening on the pitch when you're seeing it in training. And it's your job to guide them through the situation if they need it, right? If we see, and with young players, like I said, they'll support both behind the ball or behind the defensive line, and at this point, they're unable to progress. So can we provide solutions? One of the solutions would be, like I said, manufacture it. Manufacture it by having a starting position already be high, and ask them to see what happens if the defenders allow for a split pass, for example. What happens if one defender goes one way? Does that? Didn't know I could do that. Does that allow a passing option behind a direct opponent? Right? Their choice of which direction do I support probably depends on which defender is the pair of the ball carrier. Okay, so that's a little bit of. Oh, 1 second. Last thing I wanted to show you is from Michael Beale, who's a coach, an English coach, who's I believe coached in Scotland and in the Premier League, and I think he's done a lot. You can look him up. But he has. I recently saw Okay, here we go. Let me know if maybe, I don't know if you can hear this. If not, I believe there are subtitles. Okay. So I don't know if you were able to hear that, but I'll send you the video. It's a very simple game, and the reason that I like that a lot is because you can see that the simplicity of activities is where players can find the depth to the game. And in what he describes there, it's a 4-goal game, 2v2. Just go win, just go score goals. And in that case, they have he describes 2 target players to facilitate different interactions. But still, that simplicity is important because, like you said, you can do that every single training session, and players will love it. Not to mention that it's the what we can boil down football to, those 2-versus-1 situations. Can you figure out ways to manipulate your direct opponent and work with your teammate to create 2-versus-1, to exploit spaces? All those things, all those activities, the simplicity of them allows for individual expression. It allows for competition. It allows for cooperation, communication. It's all there, and the reason I wanted to share that is that oftentimes we can overthink when if we bring it back down to the simplicity of the game. And later on in the video, he says the players that succeeded in that game were the ones that were the best footballers, because it's true. If you can solve 2-versus-2 situations, you can solve the game, right? That's the difficult part. So hopefully, the purpose, my intention of this was to show how we can use situations that we see in our games, 2-versus-2 situations, and how we can recreate them very simply using directionality, using the number of players that we would like, and using starting positions to create different dynamics. The key is, can we make it competitive? Can we, and then obviously you can guide players through that experience if they need it. Okay, that's all for me. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that's something that affirms maybe the way that you already work through the simplicity of it, and maybe provide a different way of phrasing something, different way of communicating something. Ultimately, I think that's, if we can find different ways to say the same thing, it's helpful for players, because then we can communicate it in a clear way. Yeah. So any questions before we finish up?